You threw out the cheese the day you got the diagnosis or the day someone you love got it. You stood in front of the refrigerator and made a decision that felt responsible, felt protective, felt like exactly the kind of sacrifice that managing a serious condition requires, and nobody told you that you may have removed one of the most useful tools your blood sugar management had available. Not because cheese is magic, not because saturated fat has no consequences worth considering, but because certain cheeses in the right portions, eaten at the right moment in a meal, do something specific and documented in your digestive system that works directly in favor of blood sugar control. I am a preventive medicine physician and longevity researcher, and today I'm going to walk you through 5 specific cheeses that I recommend to patients managing prediabetes and type 2 diabetes, explain exactly what is happening in your body when you eat each one, tell you how much is appropriate, and show you what to eat alongside them to maximize the benefit. Stay with me through the first cheese on this list. Most people use it only as a condiment sprinkled in small amounts over pasta or salad, never understanding that it contains one of the highest concentrations of a specific vitamin directly tied to how your pancreas releases insulin of any animal source food on the planet. Before I show you the 5 cheeses, there is something about cheese and blood sugar that almost no one explains correctly, and without understanding it, you will either dismiss cheese entirely or use it without the precision that makes it genuinely useful. Cheese has a glycemic index of essentially 0. It contains almost no carbohydrate. Eating it does not produce the sharp glucose spike that bread, rice, or fruit juice produces. That part is true, and it matters, but the story does not end there. Approximately 30 to 60% of the protein in cheese can be slowly converted to glucose by the liver through a process called gluconeogenesis, occurring approximately 3 hours after eating. The fat in cheese can produce a smaller, further delayed effect on blood sugar at the 4 to 6 hour mark. These effects are much slower and much more gradual than what carbohydrates produce. But they are real, and they are the reason that portion size matters more with cheese than most people realize. Think of it this way. A slice of bread introduces glucose like a faucet turned to full pressure. Cheese introduces glucose like a slow, barely perceptible drip from a tap that is almost closed. The total amount that enters is smaller, the rate is slower, and your body has far more time to manage it without stress. But here is the critical nuance. When cheese is eaten in appropriate portions, the protein and fat it contains slow gastric emptying and stimulate the release of GLP-1, the incretin hormone that signals the pancreas to release insulin in a controlled and proportionate way. GLP-1 is the same hormonal pathway that the most widely prescribed class of diabetes and weight loss medications is designed to activate. The right portion of cheese stimulates this pathway naturally. An excessive portion overwhelms it and creates the slow glucose drip without the protective hormonal context. 1 to 2 thin slices of a firm cheese, 2 to 4 tablespoons of a softer variety, 1 to 2 tablespoons of a grated aged cheese. These are the portions that work for you. Beyond them, the equation shifts. A large analysis published in the journal Nutrition and Diabetes examining data from more than 16,000 adults found that regular consumption of cheese and yogurt was associated with a lower risk of developing type 2 diabetes. The association held after controlling for other dietary variables. Now, the 5 cheeses. I am presenting them in order from fifth to first because the one I most want you to understand is the one I am saving for last. The 5th cheese is fresh mozzarella, not the rubbery, shrink-wrapped string cheese marketed to children, not the shredded mozzarella in a bag coated with anti-caking starch. Fresh mozzarella, the kind sold in water or whey, soft and white and mild, in the specialty dairy section of most grocery stores. In 100 grams of fresh mozzarella, you get approximately 18 grams of high-quality protein, virtually 0 carbohydrate, and a moderate fat content that is noticeably lower than aged hard cheeses. But the reason fresh mozzarella earns its place on this list goes beyond the macronutrient profile. Fresh mozzarella is a naturally fermented cheese. It contains live bacterial cultures that function as mild probiotics in the digestive tract, And, over the past decade, the relationship between the gut microbiome and insulin sensitivity has become one of the most active and consistently replicated areas of metabolic research. Here is the specific mechanism. A balanced and diverse gut microbiome produces short-chain fatty acids, including butyrate, from the fermentation of dietary fiber. Butyrate has been shown to directly support the function of pancreatic beta cells, the cells responsible for producing insulin. A healthy microbiome also suppresses the low-grade chronic systemic inflammation that is present in virtually every person with insulin resistance, and that directly worsens cellular response to insulin. When you remove fermented foods from the diet in the belief that dairy is harmful, you're also removing one of the dietary inputs that supports the microbial environment your insulin-producing cells depend on. I want to tell you about a patient I will call Catherine, 67 years old, HbA1c of 7.2. She had eliminated every dairy product from her diet for nearly 3 years, based on advice she had received about saturated fat. She was tired between meals, experiencing consistent afternoon hunger that she was managing through willpower alone, and her numbers had not improved despite genuine dietary effort. I asked her to add 50 to 80 grams of fresh mozzarella to her lunch 4 times a week, paired with tomato, fresh basil, and a drizzle of extra virgin olive oil. The classic preparation that maximizes its palatability and adds the polyphenol benefit of the olive oil alongside the protein and probiotic contribution of the cheese. 3 months later, her HbA1c had come down to 6.5. She told me the afternoon sugar cravings had quietly stopped. One practical note: sodium content in fresh mozzarella varies significantly between brands. If you are also managing blood pressure, read the label and look for a low-sodium version. And if you can find buffalo milk mozzarella, the fatty acid profile is even more favorable than cow's milk mozzarella. The fourth cheese is cottage cheese. Cottage cheese does not protect blood sugar primarily through what it does in the bloodstream in the hours after eating. It protects blood sugar through what it prevents from happening 2 hours later. In 100 grams of plain cottage cheese, you get approximately 11 to 12 grams of protein, fewer than 4 grams of carbohydrate, and fewer than 100 calories. Gram for gram, it is one of the highest protein-to-calorie dairy options available in any standard grocery store. When you consume that amount of protein in that caloric context, your body releases satiety hormones including peptide YY and cholecystokinin that suppress appetite for 3 to 4 hours afterward. For a person over 60 managing blood sugar, that satiety window is clinically significant because most blood sugar damage does not come from the meal you prepared carefully and ate at the table. It comes from what happens at 3 o'clock in the afternoon when hunger arrives without warning and the nearest available option is whatever processed, rapidly absorbed carbohydrate happens to be within reach. Cottage cheese at breakfast or as a mid-morning addition quietly closes that window. The hunger does not arrive. The unplanned snack does not happen. The blood sugar spike that would have followed does not occur. Cottage cheese is also naturally rich in calcium. Meta-analyses published in journals, including the American Journal of Clinical Nutrition, have consistently found that adequate dietary calcium intake is associated with improved insulin sensitivity over time. This is a slow, cumulative effect rather than an acute one, but it is a contribution that compounds month after month when cottage cheese is part of a consistent dietary pattern. The trap I see consistently in the dairy aisle is the flavored cottage cheese sold with fruit pieces or sweetened fruit sauce. These products can contain 18 to 20 grams of added sugar per cup, which completely cancels every benefit described above. The label must say plain. If you see the words syrup, sugar, or fruit juice concentrate in the ingredient list, it is a different product. Use plain cottage cheese at breakfast with fresh berries as a spread on whole grain toast in place of cream cheese, or as a base for a savory dip with herbs, lemon, and black pepper. The third cheese is authentic Greek Feta, and the reason Feta earns this position has nothing to do with its protein content or its probiotic cultures, though both are present. It has to do with the milk it is made from and a specific type of fat that milk contains. Authentic Greek feta, the kind protected under European Union designation of origin law, must be produced from sheep's milk or a blend of sheep and goat milk. This detail is not a culinary preference. It is a nutritional distinction with documented metabolic consequences. Sheep's milk contains significantly higher concentrations of conjugated linoleic acid, known as CLA, than cow's milk does. CLA has appeared in study after study as a fatty acid associated with improved insulin sensitivity and specifically relevant to people over 60 with a reduction in visceral fat. Visceral fat is not the fat you can see or measure at the surface. It is the fat that accumulates deep in the abdominal cavity surrounding the liver, the pancreas, and the intestines. It is not visible from the outside. It produces inflammatory compounds continuously. It releases free fatty acids directly into the hepatic portal circulation, driving liver insulin resistance. It is the most metabolically damaging form of fat in the human body. I describe it to patients this way. Imagine grease has accumulated around the engine of a car. The exterior looks normal, but under the hood, every component is working harder, running hotter, and wearing out faster. That is precisely what visceral fat does to the pancreas and liver, and it is one of the strongest independent drivers of insulin resistance in older adults. The CLA in sheep's milk feta acts against this specific mechanism. In 100 grams of authentic feta, you get approximately 14 grams of protein and fewer than 4 grams of carbohydrate. It is a fermented cheese and contributes the same probiotic benefit described with mozzarella. 2 warnings. First, there is a meaningful difference between authentic Greek feta made from sheep's milk and the American-style feta sold in many supermarkets that is produced from cow's milk. The CLA profile of cow's milk feta is substantially lower. Look for the words sheep's milk on the label. Second, feta is preserved in brine and is naturally high in sodium. If you are managing blood pressure alongside blood sugar, rinse feta briefly under cold water before using it. That simple step reduces sodium content by approximately 1/3. Crumble it over a Greek salad with cucumber, olives, and olive oil. Use it as a filling in a spinach omelet. Sprinkle it over roasted vegetables. The second cheese is ricotta. Ricotta earns the second position because of a biochemical fact that is almost never discussed in the context of diabetes management, and that changes how you think about the protein in dairy. Most cheeses are produced from the solid curds of milk. Ricotta is produced from the whey, the liquid that remains after the curds are removed for other cheese production. That single difference in origin changes the entire protein profile of what you are eating. The protein in ricotta is whey protein. The protein in most other cheeses is casein. They appear identical on a nutrition label because both are listed simply as protein, but they behave very differently after you swallow them. Whey protein is absorbed more rapidly than casein. It is exceptionally rich in an amino acid called leucine, and leucine is one of the most potent natural stimulators of GLP-1 release in the human digestive tract. GLP-1 is the incretin hormone that signals the pancreas to release insulin in a controlled and proportionate response to rising blood glucose. It also slows gastric emptying, reducing the rate at which glucose from the rest of the meal enters the bloodstream. It reduces appetite through direct signaling to the brain. This is the same hormonal pathway that semaglutide and other GLP-1 receptor agonist medications target pharmaceutically. Ricotta's whey protein stimulates it naturally through leucine, through a food that costs a few dollars per container at any grocery store. A study published in the American Journal of Clinical Nutrition found that patients with type 2 diabetes who consumed whey protein shortly before a meal saw their post-meal blood sugar spike reduced by approximately 28% compared to a control group. In 100 grams of ricotta, you get approximately 11 grams of protein, 3 grams of carbohydrate, and significantly less saturated fat than aged hard cheeses. For someone managing both blood sugar and cholesterol, that combination addresses both concerns simultaneously. I want to tell you about a patient I will call Raymond. 71 years old, type 2 diabetes for 12 years. He experienced what he called his afternoon crash consistently around 4 o'clock. Shakiness, difficulty concentrating, and a hunger that reliably sent him to whatever was most accessible in the kitchen, which was rarely something that helped his glucose. I asked him to replace that late afternoon crisis with half a cup of plain ricotta stirred with fresh herbs, a slice of whole grain toast, and a small handful of almonds. He was skeptical. He tried it for 2 weeks before saying anything. 6 weeks later, the crashes had stopped. His pre-dinner glucose readings had become measurably steadier. Plain ricotta has a mild, almost neutral flavor that does not appeal to everyone immediately. Stir in fresh basil, parsley, or chives, a pinch of salt, and a drizzle of olive oil. The flavor transforms completely. And now, the cheese I have been building toward. The first cheese on this list is aged Parmesan, specifically authentic Parmigiano Reggiano imported from Italy, or a high-quality domestic aged Parmesan ripened for at least 18 to 24 months, not the powdered product in the green shaker. The real wedge with the characteristic crystalline texture that develops during long aging. In 30 grams of authentic aged Parmesan, a quantity that would function as a topping rather than a main component of a meal, you get 8 grams of protein. 8 grams from 30 grams of cheese. That is a higher protein density than any other cheese on this list. The carbohydrate content is essentially zero. And because the extended aging process breaks down virtually all of the lactose, it is tolerated well even by people with mild lactose sensitivity, but neither the protein density nor the lactose tolerance is the reason aged Parmesan is first on this list. Aged Parmesan carries one of the highest concentrations of vitamin K2 found in any animal source food available. Vitamin K2, specifically the forms called MK4 and MK7, has accumulating and increasingly compelling evidence connecting it directly to pancreatic insulin secretion. A study published in Diabetes Care following more than 38,000 adults over an average of 10 years found that higher dietary intake of vitamin K2 was associated with approximately a 20% lower risk of developing type 2 diabetes. The proposed mechanism involves K2's role in the activation of proteins involved in insulin secretion within the pancreatic beta cells. The research is not yet at the level of definitive causation, but the association is consistent. The biological mechanism is plausible, and the food source itself has no meaningful downside at appropriate portions. Vitamin K2 also performs a function that is directly relevant to the specific complications that accompany long-term diabetes. K2 acts as a molecular traffic director for calcium in the body. With adequate K2, calcium is directed into bones and teeth where it is structurally needed. Without adequate K2, calcium is more likely to deposit in arterial walls and soft tissue, a process called vascular calcification. People with type 2 diabetes have a risk of arterial calcification that is 2 to 4 times higher than the general population. The vascular damage from chronic hyperglycemia creates a biological environment that accelerates this process. Vitamin K2 directly counteracts it by routing calcium away from the arterial walls where it causes damage and toward the skeletal tissue where it belongs. For a person over 60 managing diabetes and aware of their cardiovascular risk, this dual mechanism supporting insulin secretion and protecting arterial integrity simultaneously from a single food used in tablespoon quantities as a finishing ingredient is clinically meaningful in a way that few dietary recommendations can claim. I want to tell you about a patient I will call Laura, 69 years old, prediabetes with an HbA1c of 6.2. A recent diagnosis of osteopenia alongside early coronary calcification on imaging. This combination reduced bone density and arterial calcification appearing simultaneously in a postmenopausal woman with prediabetes is more common than most people realize. The three conditions share overlapping mechanisms involving calcium metabolism, inflammatory signaling, and hormonal changes. I asked Laura to add 1 to 2 tablespoons of grated Parmigiano Reggiano daily to whatever she was already eating: roasted vegetables, soups, scrambled eggs, salads. The cheese is a finishing ingredient rather than a primary component. 8 months later, her HbA1c had moved to 5.7. Her bone density had stabilized. Her cardiologist noted no progression of the calcification on her follow-up scan. I am not attributing all of that to the cheese. She was also walking consistently and eating carefully, but the K2 contribution, which she had been receiving essentially none of before, was a genuine addition to a biological environment that needed it. Use 1 to 2 tablespoons of freshly grated aged Parmesan over salad, soup, roasted vegetables, or scrambled eggs. The flavor is intense enough that a small amount provides substantial satisfaction. The glycemic impact is 0. Now, the 3 traps that can undermine everything I have just described, because you can understand the right cheeses and still walk out of the grocery store with products that provide none of the benefits. The first trap is processed cheese slices, the individually wrapped product that does not require refrigeration in some formats. This is a processed dairy compound containing modified starches, vegetable oils, emulsifiers, preservatives, and in some cases added sugar. It does not deliver meaningful protein proportion. It does not contain live bacterial cultures. It does not carry K2 in meaningful concentrations. It is not cheese in the sense that any of the 5 I described are cheese. The second trap is pre-shredded cheese in bags. To prevent clumping, manufacturers coat the shreds with cellulose powder and sometimes potato starch. This adds 1 to 2 grams of carbohydrate per serving that most people never count. Over multiple servings across multiple meals, it accumulates in ways that are invisible without label reading. The third trap is cream cheese used as a primary source of dairy protein. Cream cheese has a poor fat-to-protein ratio. You receive substantial calories and saturated fat with very little of the protein leverage that makes the 5 cheeses on this list metabolically useful. In small amounts as a spread, it is not harmful. As a daily protein source, it is not serving you. The rule that covers all 3 traps. Read the ingredient list. If it contains more than milk, salt, rennet, and bacterial cultures, understand what those additional ingredients are and why they are present before making it a regular part of your diet. 2 final clinical notes. If you are managing high blood pressure, heart failure, or chronic kidney disease alongside diabetes, total daily sodium must be considered when increasing cheese. Rinsing brine cheeses like Feta reduces sodium meaningfully. Choosing lower sodium fresh mozzarella brands helps, but the overall sodium context of your daily intake matters and requires honest accounting. A small percentage of people will see LDL cholesterol rise with increased saturated fat intake even when blood sugar improves. This is genetically influenced and not predictable without measurement. If you increase cheese intake meaningfully, request a lipid panel 3 months later. Let the numbers tell you how your specific metabolism responds rather than assuming the result. Here is where to begin this week. Buy 2 cheeses, a container of plain ricotta, and a wedge of aged Parmesan. Those 2 together will address the meal timing, GLP-1 mechanism, the protein satiety window, the K2 contribution, and the finishing flavor that makes vegetables and soups genuinely satisfying. At your next meal, that includes any carbohydrate, whether bread, rice, pasta, or fruit, eat your cheese and vegetables first. Save the carbohydrate for the end of the meal. Research has consistently shown that eating in this sequence reduces the post-meal glucose peak by approximately half compared to eating carbohydrate first. No ingredient changes, no portion changes, only the order. Keep your portions within the range I described: 1 to 2 thin slices of firm cheese, 2 to 4 tablespoons of softer varieties, 1 to 2 tablespoons of grated aged cheese. And if you check your blood sugar after a meal containing cheese, check it twice, once at 1 hour, once at 3 hours. The 1-hour reading reflects the carbohydrate in your meal. The 3-hour reading reflects the slow protein conversion I described at the beginning. Both numbers together tell you the complete story that one measurement alone cannot. The cheese you removed from your refrigerator the day of your diagnosis was not your enemy. The decision to remove it was made without the information I have just given you. You know now which cheeses to bring back, how much to use, what to pair them with, and exactly why each one is working in your favor at the biological level. The refrigerator that once felt like a place of restriction can become something different. It begins with 2 cheeses and the understanding of what they actually do. I am Dr. Kenji Sato. If this gave you a framework that your clinical appointments have not provided, share this with someone who made the same decision on the day of their diagnosis and has been managing without information they deserve to have from the beginning. I will see you in the next one.